In this video, I'm gonna show you how you can transform a flat logo to a 3D component using Spline. In the process, you're gonna learn the basics to do modeling on your own using Spline and also understand how materials work. That way, you can apply these learnings in any project that you do in the future. Let's start by making a 3D version of Spotify's logo. Create a new file and remove the default backdrop and lighting. I also like to change the background color to something that is going to be closer to the end scene. It's going to be a little bit darker. The only reason that I do that is because it helps me see how things will turn out at the end. The next thing we are going to do is copy and paste the logo that we're going to be modeling, because we're going to be using this as reference. Just look for an image in Google and pick one that you like and simply copy and paste it into Spline. With our reference in place, we are going to start modeling by importing the cube object. This is going to be the backdrop for our logo, the black square that is going to be in the background. So it's not going to be super important to get it 100% right, but it's always a good idea to use the reset tool helper at the bottom to always keep the same camera angle when you are modeling. You can lower the opacity of the image if you put the object on the background to have an idea of how things are lining up. That's always something that we're gonna do when you are modeling from a 2D image like this. With the backdrop in place, we can start working on the waves. Select the vector tool and try to replicate the curvature of the wave from the logo. To add the curvature, you just have to press Ctrl and left click. With the vector in place, we can now turn it into a path that will make it a 3D shaped object that we need to keep adjusting to match the shape of the logo. When we transform the vector to the path, the gaps of the shape will be flat, so we need to set them to round so it mimics more the wave in the background. With the first stripe done for the waveform, we simply copy and paste it and resize it to match the smaller ones. Now that we have created the 3 waves, it's a good time to group them. That way we can make sure that when we have to align it with the other components of the scene, we're not gonna mess up the alignment in between the stripes of the waveform. To make the green circle, select the ellipse tool and holding down the shift key, press the left click and start dragging it to make it a perfect circle. You can then resize it and try to make sure that it matches the circumference of the logo. The ellipse element is completely flat by default, so if we want to make it thick, we have to increase the extrusion value. To make the borders of the ellipse round, you can play with the bevel and bevel size values until you have something that you're happy with. With all the elements of the composition now modeled, we can start working on the materials of each one of the components. Let's start with the backdrop. So for the backdrop, I want kind of like a dark green, metallic dark green. And to achieve that effect, we are gonna use 2 layers. One is gonna be the base layer, which will be the dark green color. And we are also going to add the matte cap layer, which will give it the shining effect. Spline has a set of default matte cap options that you can use to add the shining effect. There are a lot of them, and any will do the job. I went with the kind of like this one that has a line because I think it looks better for the backdrop. When you're working with materials, keep in mind that the lighting should always be on top, and if you have to apply matte caps, I always like to play around with the different mixing options. When we set the mixing option to multiply, the background color that we set before is going to take over the white spaces where the shining is from the matte cap, and that will give us the metallic effect that we're going for. For the circle, we want the same finishing effect, the same like shiny effect. The only thing that will change is the base color. We want to use the color picker to pick up the tone from the logo. That way we can keep it as close as possible to the original version. In this case, I had to use the screen option instead of multiply because we have a clear background color and the matte cap has a dark tone. So the best way to carry over the shining effect to the base color is using the screen option. That's why I mentioned earlier that you have to play around with the mixing options and make sure that you try all of them to see which one looks best for the composition or the effect that you need to do. To apply the materials to the wave grouping, I like to do it only on one of them just to see how it looks, and you can later save this material to be reused in different components, and it makes it super easy to propagate the changes if you want to later down the road update the material. To save a combination of layers or a material, you just have to click on the 4 dots right next to the material option and click the plus at the top from the tooltip that will be open. And with that, our composition is done. Now we can move on to the more creative side and the details of the scene. I'm gonna add a hovering effect to the waves of the logo. To do this, we create a new state for the grouping of the waves, basically move it a little bit up. So we have the starting position and the end position of the animation. We then set this start event with a transition, and we are gonna be looping between the two states with the ping pong effect, and that will give us the hover, infinite hover effect. The key element in any spline scene or 3D scene overall is lighting, and so far we haven't added any to our scene. So I'm gonna add some directional lighting with a green color. That way we can make the matte caps that we set up earlier really shine and show the metallic effect we set it up for the backdrop and the shiny effect for the rest of the elements. And that's it. With that, our Shopify logo is done. You can get creative with the background and maybe experiment with the different effects that Spline has for the scenes. But that is everything that you need to do to make a 3D logo in Spline. Moving on to Obsidian's logo now. This one is going to be a little bit more complicated. The backdrop is going to be the same. We don't need to get into details here because it's pretty much the same thing that we did for Spotify's logo. But when it comes to modeling the Obsidian stone, there is 2 ways of doing it. One is using the vector tool, and the other one is sculpting the stone from a cube. The quick and easy way is using the vector tool, simply drawing, following the image that we have inserted as reference, and making sure that we cover the shape for the stone. Once we have the shape completely done and closed, we have to add some extrusion and bevel the size a little bit, and that's pretty much it. You already have the stone modeled. The alternative requires a little bit more work, and maybe it's overkill for what we're doing here, but it can be useful for you in other scenarios. You basically have to add a cube to the scene, try to make it to size it as close as you can to the item that you're trying to model. In our case, it's the obsidian stone. You can see here I'm lowering the opacity of the cube so I can see the image in the background. Once you're happy with the sizing of the cube, we can start editing the mesh. To do it, click the smooth and edit button. Also, before doing it, remove the corner sides, just lower everything to 0 and then click the button. That way we don't have any subdivisions when we start with the mesh, and we have like a clean mesh. Select the loop cut from the toolbar at the top and start creating the subdivisions. For the model that we're doing here, I add 3 to the sides, so 3 horizontal cuts and 3 more vertical ones. And that should be more than enough to do the shape of the stone. With the basic mesh in place, select the edge tool and start dragging the lines to the edge of the shape that you're modeling. This is the part of the process that it takes more time, and you might need to add more lines depending on the shape that you're trying to achieve. With the shape done, scale up the object and increase the subdivision modifier. This will soften up the shape and it will round everything up. This is automatically adding more lines, more loop cuts to the mesh. You'll need to do some adjustments to the object after you increase the subdivisions, because it might get a little bit away from the initial shape. Try out the different tools that Spline has to edit the shape of mesh and make sure that you can readjust everything up before we move on to the materials. For the material on the obsidian stone, I'm gonna use the same pattern that the logo already has. So I'm gonna be creating an image layer and importing the PNG version of the obsidian stone as the texture or image layer that the material will have. Once you load the image, the object will be invisible because we need to adjust the image layer to match the shape of our object. In our case, we want to change the projection to planar and the axis set it to the Z-axis. We also want the wrapping to be clamp and scale the image. That way the image for the obsidian stone will fit our 3D model. We need to add more effects and layers to our material because the image by itself, it looks a little bit weird. So one thing that I like to do is to add a Fresnel. This will add a glow to the border of the 3D model. Play around with the parameters of the Fresnel. In my case, I will set it like a purple tone and really subtle. I don't want the glow to be too big. In my mind, the obsidian stone has sort of like a glassy effect. So I will add a glass layer and I will put it between the image, right above the image and below the Fresnel. Try out the different mixing modes till you find one that you like. With glass, always the mixing mode makes a big difference and it depends a lot on what you are trying to achieve. I ended up going with the screen option because it shows more the underlying image. For the backdrop, I'm gonna use the same technique that we used for the Spotify's logo. So it's gonna have the same end result. I'm going to add a point light to the scene. That way we can get the most out of the glass effect. And I'm gonna set it to purple just to keep things on brand. And that's it. Now we have a good idea of how to model any type of shape using Spline. Thank you for watching and catch you in the next one.